Here is the definition of anxiety from the dictionary. An abnormal and overwhelming sense of apprehension and fear, often marked by physical signs such as tension, sweating, and increased pulse rate, by doubt concerning the reality and nature of the threat, and by self-doubt about one's capacity to cope with it. And here's another definition taken from one of my grad school books. Anxiety is a cognitive emotional phenomenon. I'm sorry, but what does that even mean? And what is that? And how in the hell is that definition actually beneficial to anyone? I've heard so many people talk about anxiety like this, saying it is this self-induced thinking problem and it's all in your head. And then they use this psychological jargon to explain it. And I'm sorry, but I'm going to just come out and say it. It is not helpful at all. You've probably heard before that anxiety means you're overthinking or worrying too much, or that you just need to find more productive ways to calm down and handle your stress better. Now, if you're anything like me, you might be sick and tired of the mental health field offering you a bunch of vague explanations and surface level coping strategies when what you really need is a deeper explanation, a more thorough understanding, and a concrete mechanism to actually productively change it. The traditional understanding of anxiety bothers me for so many reasons, but most specifically because not all anxiety actually starts in your thoughts. Many people describe anxiety as starting in the body, which is why they can't put their finger on why they are experiencing it. For those who experience the bodily sensation but don't understand the trigger, resolution becomes nearly impossible. So understanding the different flavors, if you will, of anxiety might be helpful for you. So let's begin with what it actually looks like when anxiety hits. So often your heart rate increases, your breathing becomes shallow, your chest tightens, your vision narrows, your muscles tense up, and whether you realize it or not, your brain prioritizes survival over logic. And then your mind tries to explain what's happening. If you don't understand what your body is doing, that common explanation can easily translate into something must just be wrong with me. But I am here to tell you that anxiety is not a character flaw. It is a nervous system state, meaning that you are in fight or flight. And once you understand how that works in your body and in your mind, anxiety starts to make a lot more sense and be less confusing. And when things actually make sense to us, only then can we start the process of change. So today I want to break down anxiety in a way that is not so dang abstract, like the mental health field often describes it. And then I want to discuss how to actually productively work with it. So first, let's start with what anxiety actually is. Anxiety is your nervous system preparing for a threat. And yes, this can be either real or imagined. When your brain detects something that it believes is dangerous, it activates your sympathetic nervous system, which I often refer to as your body's mobilization system, because it increases adrenaline, cortisol, raises your heart rate, blood starts moving towards your muscles, your breathing starts to become faster, your senses sharpen, because your body is preparing to fight, flee, or solve something. It is basically energy moving outward. Okay, just knowing that, I hope you realize this is actually not a flaw. It is a biological survival mechanism that everyone has. In fact, anxiety disorders are the most common mental health condition worldwide. So wouldn't you logically think it's kind of important that we understand what it is? Because even beyond diagnosable disorders, everyone experiences anxiety at some point because it is built into the human nervous system. What we call a panic attack is essentially a surge of that same activation. So the body starts to accelerate, your heart pounds, your chest tightens, you might feel dizzy, shaky, or like you can't breathe. And then your mind jumps in and tries to explain what is happening. And how we explain and make sense of our anxiety is the very thing that becomes so destructive to us. So we start to think, shit, something must be wrong. I'm losing control. This is all in my head. What if I pass out? And now the fear is no longer about the situation itself. The fear becomes about the sensations you are experiencing. That is a panic attack, which is basically the original anxiety or fear topped with the fear or anxiety of being in the state in which you have no control over your bodily response. Okay, but back to anxiety. Here is the important thing to understand about anxiety. It is not random, even though it often feels that way. So I want to uncover 10 possibilities that anxiety might be covering for you. Number 1, anger you don't allow. So instead of acknowledging that something actually made you angry, it may surface as anxiety. Number 2, truth you don't want to face. Maybe you know something in your life isn't working, but admitting that it's not working would require change, so it surfaces as anxiety instead. 3, a boundary you're struggling to set. Part of you might know you should say no, but you keep saying yes anyway, and your body starts to feel anxious. 4, a decision you're avoiding. The longer a decision goes unresolved, the more your mind tries to anticipate every possible outcome. 5, fear of disappointing someone. Sometimes anxiety is the tension between who you really are and who you think others expect you to be. 6, uncertainty about the future. Sometimes when anxiety surfaces, because the mind starts scanning for answers that don't actually exist yet. 7, fear of being judged or rejected. You see this one often with people who struggle with social anxiety. 8, pressure to control things you actually can't control. So this could be relationships, outcomes, other people's opinions, the future, etc. 9, suppressed emotions, grief, hurt, fear, any of those emotions that haven't had the space to fully be felt. And number 10, the body preparing for something important. Because sometimes anxiety shows up not because something is necessarily wrong, but because something really matters to you. Now, earlier I referred to anxiety as the body's mobilization system. But anxiety becomes problematic when we experience the sensation of mobilization without direction. So it's actually the influx of energy without any action that's the problem, not the mobilization itself. So if you're avoiding making a decision, that's just energy building up in your body. If you're fearful of setting a boundary that you know needs to happen, that's energy living inside of you. If you're avoiding the anger you actually feel inside, it's taking up emotional space whether you acknowledge it or not. When the nervous system mobilizes before the mind can fully understand why, we often interpret this sensation in our body as a sign of danger rather than as information. That's why so many people believe that we need to get rid of anxiety. But the truth is, when energy has nowhere to go, it starts to loop back on itself. So the body stays activated, your mind keeps scanning for what might go wrong, and that cycle then feeds itself. And when the loop repeats often enough, anxiety can easily move from something you experience occasionally into something that begins shaping how you live your life. That's where it helps to understand the difference between a state and a disorder. A state is something that your nervous system moves in and out of. So your body activates and then eventually it settles. A disorder is when that state becomes persistent. So when the nervous system starts reacting in the same way over and over, and the person then begins organizing their entire life around avoiding that feeling, that's a disorder. So let me give you an example. Feeling anxious before giving a presentation, maybe going on a first date, or anticipating a very difficult conversation you have to have, that's a state. Your body is mobilizing energy for something that actually matters to you. But if someone begins avoiding meetings, maybe staying home from work or social situations, avoids driving or traveling or even leaving the house because they are afraid of the anxiety itself, that's when it can start moving towards an anxiety disorder, because now the nervous system has learned to treat the feeling of anxiety as the threat. So the goal is never to eliminate anxiety. The goal is actually to become someone who can experience that intensity without trying to immediately escape it. Because the moment your nervous system learns that the sensation of anxiety is survival, that loop starts to loosen. So you're probably now asking, well, can those states be changed? And the answer is yes, but not by force. You can't will your way into changing a state. When anxiety shows up suddenly, our instinct is usually to fix it or stop the symptom because we don't like the discomfort in our body. But the truth is, the nervous system doesn't change through that kind of force. It changes because it receives new experiences of safety, completion, and capacity. So let's talk about how we go about this. So with safety, when your body experiences cues of safety, so that's like a calm environment, maybe taking a minute to breathe steadily, supportive people in your life, your brain is going to begin to lower that threat response. Regulation, so practices that calm our body. So that might be something, a practice that you have of slowing your breathing or releasing tension in your muscles. Those things signal to the nervous system that the danger is no longer there. It is actually past. When we understand the meaning. So sometimes anxiety points to something that's really important for us. So that could be a boundary, an unresolved emotion, or a situation that demands attention. The clarity behind that can reduce the tension you feel inside. So seek to understand where anxiety is pointing you and what information is hidden in the discomfort. Action. When we take small steps towards what we're avoiding, it teaches the brain that through experience, the situation is manageable and not so dangerous. Relational connection is another one, because our nervous system regulates when we are in safe connection with other people. So feeling seen, heard, supported, all of those things can release the activation and tension that anxiety brings. Movement is another one. Physically moving our bodies help complete the stress cycle by allowing the body to release the built-up activation. Repetition. The nervous system learns through repeated experiences. This is why gradually facing anxiety can retrain the brain over time. States are trainable, but ingrained states, as we see with disorders, do require layered intervention. So that could be therapy, lifestyle changes, and consistent practice. Those can all play a role. And I'm not going to sit here and say that it is easy, but it is absolutely possible. Now, the modern psychological approach has developed numerous ways of dealing with anxiety, but one of the most well-researched is cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. CBT focuses on the relationship between thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, but it does not explore why panic or anxiety starts in the first place. So with anxiety, CBT typically addresses two things. The first is catastrophic thinking and distorted beliefs, because when anxiety shows up, the mind often jumps to worst case scenarios. CBT is going to help people examine those thoughts and then replace them with more realistic interpretations. Second, avoidance behaviors. So avoidance is one of the biggest factors that keeps anxiety alive. When we avoid situations that trigger anxiety, while we might temporarily feel relief over time, avoidance actually teaches the brain that this must be dangerous. Therefore, CBT will use gradual exposure to help the nervous system learn that feared situations are actually survivable. So this approach is highly evidence-based and helps so many people. But it's not the only way to understand how to work with anxiety. And what I've noticed is that often people feel like something deeper is happening. So I want to look at a few other perspectives. So across different fields, we're talking psychology, philosophy, and trauma work, anxiety is often understood in slightly different ways. But what I have found interesting is that many of these alternative approaches overlap with one another. So in Western psychology, one concept that is studied heavily in anxiety research is called intolerance of uncertainty. So people who struggle with anxiety can feel an intense need to predict what will happen in the future. So worry becomes an attempt to mentally simulate their future. So they're thinking, if I can think through every possible outcome, then I'll be prepared for what happens. But the problem is that certainty rarely arrives. So the mind keeps searching. Anxiety then becomes the nervous system trying to create safety by predicting the future. There's also the perspective that anxiety appears when the conscious mind encounters something unknown or unintegrated. So something doesn't quite fit into our current understanding of ourself or of the world. The ego wants stability and predictability. It thrives and functions on stability and predictability. But the problem with that is that life is a series of constant uncertainty. So when something feels uncertain, anxiety can emerge as the psyche trying to make sense of something unfamiliar. Therefore, anxiety can sometimes signal that something new is trying to emerge into our awareness. Now, we also have the Eastern philosophies that teach that suffering arises when the mind tries to control that cannot be controlled. Well, as we just mentioned, life is inherently uncertain. Everything changes. So as the mind is seeking stability in an uncertain world, anxiety increases when we believe we must eliminate uncertainty in order to feel safe. And then lastly, others describe anxiety as a form of hypervigilant anticipation. So the nervous system constantly scans for what might go wrong because an earlier experience has taught that an unexpected event is going to be painful. So anxiety can show up as the nervous system's way of trying to stay ahead of potential danger. And it becomes a strategy then to avoid emotional pain. So no matter which perspective resonates with you the most, all of them share the same common theme. Anxiety is connected to the mind's attempt to create certainty and control in an uncertain world. And this leaves us with a big problem because there is literally no way to escape the uncertainty of the world we live in. Understanding that means that the solution cannot be to eliminate uncertainty because it's impossible to do so. So while mainstream treatment for anxiety might look like finding ways to distract yourself or reframe your thoughts or find ways to calm yourself down, the real way out of anxiety is actually not from calming down. It's increasing our capacity to live with uncertainty and experience intensity without the fear associated with it. Because peace does not come from controlling the future. It comes when we expand our capacity to live with uncertainty. In fact, anxiety becomes a cycle because of resistance and misinterpretation. The sensation arises, the mind labels it as dangerous, the fear increases, the body responds, and you attempt to escape or suppress it. So the body learns that the sensation is actually dangerous. And now that anxiety has been reinforced, you have a full-blown cycle. So instead of trying so hard to suppress or get rid of anxiety, we have to allow the body to complete the stress cycle. So, if anxiety is just a part of being human, I hope you're asking, what can we actually do with it? Because I am prepared to give you 10 ways to begin working with anxiety so that we can gradually build more capacity. Number 1, name the state. Recognize what is happening in your body. Instead of saying, oh my God, I'm freaking out, try simply acknowledging that your nervous system is activated. Because this small shift puts distance between you and the experience. And in doing that, you're reminding yourself that it is just a state. It is not a definition of who you are. 2, understand the physiology. Anxiety sensations are uncomfortable, I will give you that, but they are not dangerous. A heart racing, shaky hands, tight chest, sweating, these are signs that your body is simply mobilizing energy. They are not signs that you are falling apart. And when you understand what is happening, stop feeling so mysterious and dangerous. 3, slow your exhale. Yes, I know. Everyone and their mother will tell you to slow your breathing, and I'm here to repeat the same advice. The reason is simple. Longer exhales activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the part of your nervous system responsible for slowing things down and restoring balance in your body. Even slightly lengthening your exhale can begin signaling safety to your nervous system. 4, stay with the sensation. Yes, I understand that this can feel counterintuitive because our instinct is to escape anxiety as quickly as humanly possible. But when we immediately suppress or avoid the sensation, the nervous system never learns that the experience is survivable. If you can tolerate it, allow the sensation to arise, to peak, and then eventually fall on its own. That is how the brain learns that anxiety does not equate to danger. 5, reduce avoidance. Avoidance feels good in the short term, but in the long term, it will reinforce fear. Every time we avoid something, and literally it could be anything, because of anxiety, the body learns that the situation must have been dangerous. So gradually facing what it is that we fear in manageable steps teaches the nervous system that we can handle it. 6, move your body. Anxiety is physical energy. Movement helps the body release that energy and complete the stress cycle. So it could be walking or stretching or just shaking out the tension. Even taking a few minutes to just move around can help your nervous system to reset. 7, challenge the catastrophic thinking. Anxious minds tend to jump to worst case scenarios. So when you notice it happening, pause and ask yourself, is this outcome actually likely, or is my mind trying to protect me by imagining the worst case scenario? This is actually where techniques from CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy can be extremely helpful. 8, look for the information hidden in the emotion. Emotions carry information, and sometimes anxiety appears just because something in our lives needs attention. So it could be that boundary that hasn't been set, the decision that hasn't been made, or the emotion that hasn't been fully acknowledged. So understanding what anxiety may be pointing you towards can reduce some of the internal tension. Number 9, reduce shame. Too many people feel ashamed about their anxiety, but shame is only going to amplify the experience. When we understand that anxiety is a normal biological response, not a definition of personal failure, shame begins to lessen. I actually talked about this in another video on my channel where I explain where shame really comes from and how our early relationships shape how we interpret our emotions. And I think that if you struggle with shame, this is a really important one for you to watch. So I will link it in the description. And lastly, number 10, build your capacity through repetition. Your brain changes through repeated experience. This is neuroplasticity. Every time you experience anxiety and discover that you can handle it, even in small ways, your nervous system learns something new. Capacity doesn't change overnight. It grows gradually through repeated repetition. I understand how easy it is to want to eliminate anxiety, but anxiety is not the enemy. Like all emotions, it is a signal. And at its core, it's your nervous system trying to protect you in a world that is inherently uncertain. When you start to see anxiety through that lens, it stops feeling like something is wrong with you and starts to look like something your system learned. And if it was learned, it can also be unlearned or relearned. The goal is not to eliminate anxiety. The goal is to build the capacity to experience it without letting it control the direction of your life. Anxiety loses its power when your nervous system learns through experience that you can handle uncertainty and that you can handle the intense emotion. Your nervous system is always learning. So the real question becomes, what are you teaching it? And every time you stay present with anxiety instead of running from it, every time you feel it and don't try to escape, you are teaching your system something new. You are teaching it that you are capable. And over time, that changes everything.